Welcome back to Reboot with Dr. Arasi Maran. Today we have an incredible guest joining us, Dr. Melissa Milanak. She is renowned sleep consultant who has helped countless individuals transform their sleep and their overall well-being. Dr. Milanak is not only a trusted expert in sleep science but also an advocate for better sleep hygiene. She offers practical solutions to help people sleep smarter and live a healthier lifestyle. With her online presence through workshops, resources, personalized guidance, she has become a go to resource for anyone seeking to improve their sleep ability. Whether they struggle with insomnia or stress related sleep disturbances or just want to optimize their health, she is the person to go to. In today's episode, we will dive into how sleep affects not only your daily energy levels, but how does it affect your mental and physical health. Dr. Melanak, so good to have you here, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me. How are you doing?
Doing wonderful. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Uh, you know, Sleep is such a complex topic. All of us struggle with it. And I'm so glad there's actually an expert who can talk to us and teach all of us how to do this, something we've been doing all through our lives a little bit better. But tell me a little bit, how did you get into this space?
Well, my career actually started working in the world of trauma and PTSD. And so, as I was doing a lot of work in that space I spent a number of years working overseas back and forth with the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And the last 6 years, I spent some quality time in South Africa working with communities and townships that were displaced during apartheid. And the ongoing theme that we saw over and over again is that for individuals with trauma and PTSD, they have significant sleep problems.
Hmm.
And what most people don't realize is that it's actually the number one most prevalent symptom that we see. So when I came to MUSC over 14 years ago now, I was doing work with our team at the National Crime Victim Center, and they were looking at as DSM-5 was coming out, the book that many people use to look at mental health concerns. And the research was showing that over 92% of people that have traumatic experiences and stressful life experiences, over 92% of people with PTSD had sleep disruptions. And it wasn't just the nightmares, but it was more like insomnia, the difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. And so the more work that I've been doing in the space, I just saw how sleep was so much of this underlying component. Some people sleeping too much, sleeping too little, looking at risk for suicide and addictions and just overall performance and quality of life. And so there's much more to the over the last 20 years, but that's really how I transitioned from doing more of the trauma and anxiety piece to really bringing sleep in. And what I love about it is if you help somebody to sleep better, you truly can positively impact every aspect of their life, physically and mentally.
It's funnily enough, when I was a younger, more irresponsible person in life, I could sleep. I could sleep like that. And during my teenage years, I think it's most of the 24-hour day, 16 hours was probably spent in sleeping. Sleeping was my favorite pastime in life. But as I grew older and, responsibilities and work, if I have a great day at work, I'm wired up. If I have a bad day at work, I'm reliving it. Both extremes, I'm just like constantly wired, and sleep, it's linked to so many diseases, cardiovascular disease, mental health issues, Alzheimer's. Can you talk a little bit about why has it become so challenging to fall asleep? We've been doing this since birth.
I know it's really interesting that you say that because one of the things that our body is supposed to do naturally, but we seem to struggle with it so much. And I chuckle because you see these kids that it's nap time and they're fighting the nap. And then I feel like we hit adulthood and we wish we could have the nap.
Yes.
But there are a number of reasons why we see it getting disrupted. One is going to be obviously what you just touched on in terms of our brain and being able to shut our brain off. Part of that is, and I love to use the analogy where I say you wouldn't take a casserole out of the oven and immediately put it in the fridge. You would want to give it that chance to cool down. But for so
Hmm.
many of us, we aren't doing that with our brains. So we go throughout the day, we have all of these things that are happening. Our brains are constantly being stimulated, even good things. And then our brain needs that opportunity to process and to decompress. But we're not giving it the chance to do that. So we go, go, go. We climb in bed. We're alone with our thoughts. We want it to shut off. And now our brain is wired. So then what do? We doom scroll and we get on
Yes.
our technology and our light. And light is one of the other biggest culprits that people don't realize. But throughout the day, we are perceiving light. So our eye, our optic nerve is perceiving light and it's sending messages to this little part of the brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but we'll call it the sleep switch. And it
Okay.
says, it's light out, be awake. It's dark out, be asleep. So what we're seeing a lot of these disruptions now is with the introduction of a lot of our technology. While our devices are wonderful, sometimes what happens though is we're now our brain doesn't know when it's time to prepare for sleep. That's one of the reasons why we see so many people having melatonin disruptions, for
Mhm.
instance, because what would happen is the sun would start to naturally set. It would start to get darker about 4 to 6 hours before bed, and our body would start to register, oh, it's getting darker. Let me start producing the chemicals that are related to sleep. Let me start to unwind. We don't have that anymore. We go, go, go. We're on our devices, bright. And then now it's time to fall asleep. And our brain and body weren't able to prepare to do so.
But we kind of keep saying technology 30 minutes before, 45 minutes before. It does not, I mean, it's very difficult to follow that rule. It's almost like you doom scroll and somewhere, okay, I am sleepy, and you shut down, and the brain does not decompress. And sometimes, I'm a big fan of the Calm app, but there have been times the Calm app is spouting out instructions to rest different parts of our body, and my brain's too wired to even listen to it and follow the instructions. Any solutions how
So
to unwind?
yes. So what I love to tell people, and I can say I have seen this successfully work for all different types of people. So whether it's literally the corporate exec, the spec ops military, the stay at home mom, and everything in between, is one of the ways to allow our brain that unwind time about 15 to 20 minutes before bed. Take a notepad and a pen, no technology. And we want to do this outside of bed. And on the right hand side, you want to write your to do list for the next day. I have to go to the bank. I have to go to the dry cleaners. I need to make this phone call. Because you're going to crawl into bed, and when there are no other distractions around, your brain's going to start thinking and planning. So you want to do that ahead of time. And then on the left hand side of the page, we want to take a few minutes and we want to literally take everything running through our mind and do a brain dump. Put it all on the page. I usually will tell people to start out setting a timer for 5 minutes,
Hmm.
because the first minute are high level things. Oh, I'm worried about kids, finances, health. But when you're forced to write more, your brain starts pouring all of this information on that page. Now, I will tell you, we're not creating worries. So people
Hmm.
say that, and it's not, oh, I don't want to do this right before bed. But what it's actually doing is it's allowing our brain that opportunity to problem solve, to process, to get everything there. And then you take it, you put it on the nightstand, and you get in bed. And if your brain is still running and racing, you get out of bed, you write more, and get back in bed. Because what we're
Hmm.
teaching our brain, just like you take a puppy and you put it outside to train it to potty outside, you're teaching your
Okay.
brain that it's not allowed to do that in bed. And so what we're doing is we're rebuilding that connection that our bed is for sleep. That's why, to some of the other points, it's really important that our bed is reserved for sleep and romantic activity, and that is it. Everything else needs to be outside of bed, watching TV, reading. We can do all those things to wind down. But if we're doing that in bed, then our brain is confused. Am I supposed to be awake
Ah.
right now? Should I be asleep right now? Should I be paying attention to those instructions? Should I be paying attention to what I'm reading or listening to? That's why a lot of people fall asleep on the couch. They get up and they get in bed and they can't fall asleep because the brain connects the couch with sleep instead.
Mm.
And especially for individuals that are traveling or they're on call and you're sleeping in different places, you really want to strengthen that connection with bed and sleep, because when you don't have a lot of time, it helps you to fall asleep faster because the bed has become one of those cues for sleep instead of for everything else that we didn't have time for in the day.
So I think it's safe to assume you don't have a TV in your bedroom.
No, and I try to get people to take them out as much as possible. And literally, when traveling with friends and such over the years and family, I will take the remote in the hotel room and hide it.
Okay,
Because
that's interesting.
but I mean, and that's so we have the light that's coming off the TV, but it's also, so if you've ever listened to television, have you noticed that the commercials are louder than the regular programming?
Yes, yes.
So, and it's doing that to get your attention. But let's think about what's happening from a sleep standpoint. So we're starting to fall asleep, and that volume change happens, and it starts to wake you back up again. And
Yes,
that's the
yes.
thing with a lot of these apps and different podcasts and things where, yes, for a lot of people, The reason that we're relying on the TV and those things is that because our brain has been so active throughout the day and we didn't give it the chance to decompress, now we're trying to distract it with these other things. But then the light from the TV disrupts, the volume changes, and sometimes if there's things that have the voices, that can also cause these little micro awakenings because our brain is constantly scanning to protect us and check for threats. And so if it hears this voice and it says, oh, I don't recognize that voice, that person's not supposed to be in the bedroom, then
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people will experience these micro awakenings. So if you wear the wearable devices, the trackers and such,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people don't realize how many times they're waking up throughout the night. They're not coming to full consciousness, but it's pulling them out of restful stages of sleep to help them to be a bit more alert to check for threats. So all these things that we think we're doing to make ourselves fall asleep or to make our sleep better can sometimes make our sleep worse.
You are just busting all my routines right now. Let me just say that. Because I realized I sleep very well in a classroom when there's a monotonous voice going
Yes.
on. So I got into the habit of using Audible to go to sleep. I don't like podcasts because, as you said, there's a start and a stop and there's music in between. So it's very annoying, etc. I actually sometimes when I want to take a nap, I take a 2 hour podcast because I will wake up and the podcast ends or something like that. Such a bad way. Please don't use my podcast like that, people, to go to sleep.
Oh no, we're going to keep them awake. We're not putting them to sleep about sleep today.
Yes, but so I go to Audible and I have specific narrators whose voices puts me
Yes.
to sleep, and I've heard that book so many times. But as you said, even when there's a pause, I wake up and those micro awakenings are happening throughout the night. And I use the books I know really well so I can catch the thread back again and go back to sleep. But that's, you are telling me that's terrible for me.
Well, because what's happening is we're using that to distract the brain. And
Yes.
so part of it is okay, let's give the brain what it actually needs. So instead of having the empty calories, we want to eat some healthy nutrition, right? We want our brain. So if we're just doing these things to distract it, that's why doing exercises like that writing before bed, where we're giving the brain what it's doing is it's trying to get our attention. It's trying to do what it's designed to do and process and think through it. So when we're not giving our brain the chance to do that because we're go, go, go throughout the day, now we climb in bed and our brain's like, okay, finally I can. Well, now we're having this fight with ourselves because we don't want to do it then. We want to sleep.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for some people, they can fall right to sleep, but then they wake up at 3 a.m. because they've reduced just enough of that fatigue that now their body is waking them up and saying, okay, now can I process? And so if we now lay in bed for the next 30, 40 minutes and our brain is thinking, we have just rewarded our body and our brain and said, if you wake up at 3 a.m., I'm going to let you do the processing that I didn't let you do during the day. So guess what's going to happen? We're going to keep waking up. And so that's why we want to be doing that writing. As even if you wake up at 3 a.m., a lot of people will have amazing creative ideas. I mean, we see this
Yes.
from our artists and our scientists. Great. So write it on the notepad and then get back in bed. Don't turn on our phones because then the light's going to wake our brain up. We're going to see all these other alerts. We don't want our brain to be amped up. Write our notes down. And that's why it's so great to have it there on the nightstand. Because
Mm.
usually what happens is if we're not writing it down, we're trying to remember it in our brain. So think about it. If you're trying to remember a phone number or directions, you keep repeating it. So what we're doing is we're like, oh, I need to do this tomorrow. Okay. So we keep thinking about it. Well, then our brain can't shut down. And so
Yes.
that's where, yes, there are things like you said to distract the brain. Some people will use things like the sleep stories and such. The monotonous is much better. I'll tell people if they have to have something, set the timer so that it does shut off, so that it's not playing the whole night and continuing to disrupt. Or even better, if you need noise, a white noise machine, something that's
Mm.
static like that, or a fan. There are alternatives that you can use to have a little bit of that noise. Like my folks that grew up in the city and they can't sleep when it's too quiet, or I know a lot of the doctors that I've worked with, they're so used to being on call and having to sleep in hospitals that it almost feels too quiet.
Yes.
But we can
Yes.
do it in creative ways that are going to help us to not disrupt our sleep. That's where, again, and like you're saying, oh, well, I'm not really paying attention to it. I'm just listening to it in the background. It's somewhat case in
It's
point.
somewhat. So, you kind of touched upon this. Let's talk about the use of white noise, right? I mean, I've heard pink noise, blue noise. There are different, I mean, let's talk about white noise.
Sure. So noise, same as light, where we think about, right, with white light, where it has all the frequencies. And with white noise, It's going to have all the different sounds and the frequencies. So in general, that's going to be used as your static noise. It's going to block all different tones. In general, the other two that have gotten the most attention have been pink noise and brown noise. So many times pink noise has been recommended for children. It is said that it's a little bit more softer, and it's supposed the frequencies are supposed to somewhat represent, if you think of like the mother's heart beating and such. So many times they'll recommend doing the pink noise instead of the white noise for children. And then when we get to the brown noise, many times it's a little bit of that, more of that deeper register, that thud. They'll say like, you're thinking like the ocean waves crashing where you can have the consistency. But so for some people, the white noise feels too harsh. And so they want to break it down. Now there's a lot more, as you said, people talking about green noise and others. The three that I've read the most about are the white noise, the pink, and the brown, but there are other variations. A lot of the machines now have the different ones. So I'll even encourage people, try them out. See what feels
Okay.
most comforting or which one you can relate to. But any of those that are very static are much better than when we have the volume changes. That's why even folks listening to classical music, while it doesn't have the lyrics, it still has crescendos and decrescendos. And it's those volume changes, that clash of the cymbal, that can cause that micro awakening. And every time we have those, it's pulling us out of the restful stages of sleep for our body and brain to heal and repair.
So even with these noises, you do recommend using a timer and shutting it down in 30 minutes or 45 minutes, or can they go throughout the night?
So for the static noise, like the fan or the white noise machine, a lot of people will just run those all throughout the night. And we can find it helpful for a number of reasons. Maybe you have a neighbor that has a dog that's barking, or
Hmm.
we see different seasons of the year where somebody's air conditioning or heat may kick on and that change. So there can be different reasons why sometimes having a low noise, low static noise can work well. My biggest things that I tell people is that we just want to be cautious of what we're using every day,
Hmm.
because then we start to build that connection. So if I said to you, I'm going to go to the movies, I'm going to the cinema, what snack am I most likely going to get? What would you think of?
Popcorn.
Most people say movies, popcorn. Well,
Hmm.
I want our brain to think bed sleep,
Sleep.
not bed stress, not bed process. But if now that white noise machine is part of that routine, your brain's going to think white noise sleep.
Sleep.
So
Yeah.
that's why we want to be careful. What are the things that we are doing sleep triggers are great. We need sleep triggers, but it's figuring out what are the things that you can consistently do. If you're traveling, is the app on your phone so it can come with you? Or now I can't sleep because I'm not at home with my machine?
Yes. Which we can't use all the time.
Right. And so if we can, like if there's an app for that and it's on your phone and such. So that's where I think there's a lot of that, just better understanding that a lot of the things that we're doing in our daily routines or that we're doing to try to sleep better sometimes make it worse. And so it's just figuring out, like when you wake up in the middle of the night, it's usually recommended that you don't eat or drink a lot.
Hmm.
And the reasoning for that, it's not just because of how it impacts your bladder and wakenings, but if you're not getting enough hydration during the day, and then you drink that 8 ounces of water in the middle of the night every night, guess what's going to happen?
You're
Your
going to
body's
wake
going to
up.
wake you up because it's now realizing that that's when it gets it. So it's all these little behavioral things. But the nice thing is we can make these adjustments, and then we're not required to just take medications or self medicate to knock ourselves out to sleep as well.
So, let's talk about things which we can do before we get into bed, which can give us a better night's sleep. So, how about meals? What is the latest, or how long, or how soon should we eat before we go to bed?
So, one of the things that I've been hearing more and more, the trends in the behavioral sleep medicine space, is to follow a 3-2-1 plan. So, they say 3 hours before bed, stopping our exercise, 2 hours before
Okay.
bed, our food, 1 hour before bed, technology. And the thing with eating is you don't want to go to bed hungry. So, if you want
Hmm.
to have a small little snack before bed, even a few minutes before bed, that's fine. But we don't want to be eating a heavy meal. I think about with people swimming, right? Don't eat and then immediately go swimming because the
Yes.
blood is digestion instead of your limbs. Well, the same thing. If our body is trying to digest the food, then it's going to have these, our resources are not all dedicated to the sleep repair. And that's why we have a lot of people that will experience like GERD and gas,
Yeah,
in terms of
reflux
that
disease, and
reflux and
yes.
such as well. So we want to be aware of that. But it doesn't mean you can't have a little bit of a snack. But we really would like to eat our heavier meals a few hours earlier in the day, give our body that time for digestion. If you find that your bladder is waking you up multiple times, Pay attention to how much fluid you're taking in the few hours before bed for that as well. And the thing is, it's very typical for people to wake up about once a night to use the
Mm-hmm.
restroom. I see folks literally from the time they hit their late 20s, early 30s, and it's not the issue of the wake up. If it's once a night, you wake up, you go to the restroom, you get back in bed, and you're asleep within 5 to 10 minutes. It's when now you're up for 20, 30, 40 minutes, you're up longer, or you're up 3, 4, 5 times throughout the night. That's when we start to see those disruptions.
So the next very common, everybody I'm sure is curious about this, caffeine and sleep.
Oh, caffeine. So,
Yes.
a few things to talk about that. So, do you want to take a guess how many hours it usually takes for your body to process out the caffeine in one cup of coffee?
I mean, since I normally need a second cup of coffee in the midday, I'm going to say 4 to 6 hours.
So we see a half life of around 5, but in general, it's usually about 7 to 8 hours for your body to process out the
Mhm.
caffeine in one cup of coffee. So I always joke and I'll say, if you can have 2 espressos and go right to sleep, we need to talk about your tolerance. But I think what's important to note is how it works. So there is a chemical that our body produces called adenosine. And from the moment we wake up, we start to have more and more of it in our system. And the more that we have, the more sleepy we feel. Think of like this
Mhm.
heaviness. Well, caffeine chemically is very similar. There's literally like one or two molecules that are very. So what happens is when we bring the caffeine into our body is going to basically be noticing the caffeine, and it stops noticing the adenosine. So think about
Mm.
what that means. It's not that we're less tired, it's that we're no longer able to perceive that we're tired.
Mm.
So
So we
it's
could be,
good that we're awake, but that's why you can fall asleep behind the wheel with a cup of coffee. And if
yes.
you do this day in and day out, I mean, I think what I'd like to see people do is shift their perception on feeling sleepy. And what I mean by that is feeling sleepy is a good thing. It's telling us that our body needs rest and repair. It's the same thing as pain. We don't
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
feeling pain, but if I put my hand on a hot stove, I want it to feel painful, so I'm alerted to remove my hand instead of keeping it there and getting burned. If we're feeling sleepy, that's letting us know that our body and our brain need time to heal and repair. But we do everything within our power and with today's society to avoid
Yeah.
it.
Yes, yes. So, what are your thoughts about, all these energy drinks, the monsters of the worlds and the Red Bulls and, the Celsius and like, I'm
Yes.
like, why? Why do why do we do this to ourselves?
Well, I think part of it is that they need that, they want the caffeine because for some people, they have their coffee in the morning because they love the taste and it's that relaxing time. But for a significant group of people, the caffeine really is what gives them that boost to get through the day.
Mm-hmm.
But not everybody likes the taste of coffee, or they
Mm-hmm.
don't want to wait in line or brew the coffee. And so we are this culture of wanting that instant gratification and things immediately. So you can have your pack of energy drinks, and if you don't want the coffee and you want to have something quick, and you can, and also a lot of them have more of the sugars or the amount of caffeine, you get even more of that boost or that jolt. But caffeine is still caffeine and it's still
Yes.
going to impact the
Mm-hmm.
body. But the problem is that the more that we become reliant on it, now that's how our body knows to function and it comes to expect it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Another very common thing is, adjusting the room temperature. Is there any science to it when adjusting room temperature and sleep?
So we know that whenever we sleep, our body usually drops about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit, about 1.5 Celsius throughout the course of the night. And
Mm-hmm.
so in general, we want it to be cold enough that we need a cover. I
Okay.
tell people that over numbers. Now there's some research out there that says it should be 67 or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. But what I found with the work that I've done with sleep globally is some of it is very geographically independent. When I'm working with my folks in Ireland and Northern Ireland, 75 degrees Fahrenheit to them is a heat wave, whereas in
Yes.
Charleston, we think it's cold. So there's a bit of what does it mean for it to be colder and to need that cover. But that is something when I have folks traveling, for instance, and dealing with jet lag and trying to trigger the body, if we can be lowering the temperature a bit at night, then it starts to trigger the body. Okay, it's getting a little bit colder. I'm going to drop the temperature. We see the opposite of that in the waking up process. Just to touch on that for a minute, if you don't mind, what I found so intriguing is a lot of people don't realize that the wake up process, our bodies can actually start waking up about 2 to 3 hours before we wake up, because it starts to raise our temperature again. It starts to produce chemicals like cortisol and such. And so that's why so many people wake up about 3 a.m. every single morning, because they're sensitive to the temperature change, the chemical changes. But then what do? They look at the clock, they start
Yes.
calculating, they get frustrated. The worst thing you can do when you wake up in the middle of the night, do not check the clock. It doesn't matter what time it is. Because you'll think about it. You're going to start thinking, okay, I've gotten 3 hours of sleep. I have to be up in 45 minutes. Should I try to fall back to sleep? None of
Yes.
that is restful.
I feel like you're just talking about how I spend my time in bed. Like literally, I even actually went to my primary care physician and said, "This is not normal. Why am I waking up at 3 a.m.? I should be, if I can just push it 2 more hours and wake up at 5 a.m., that will be great. Instead, I'm so bright-eyed, bushy-tailed at 3 a.m. Then I force myself to sleep. Then at 5 a.m., I am
You're
so
exhausted.
exhausted, and a deep sleep comes in, and I cannot get up before 7 a.m. and it's too late.
So there's a couple interesting things with that. And so part of it is that now, but now you'll know, right? Okay, this is why my body's waking me up. And so what I found is that when people have that, if you wake up and you're like, okay, my alarm has not gone off, it's not time to be awake yet, doesn't matter what time it is. When you roll back over and you get in that habit, you actually will find that it's easier to fall back to sleep, because we're having some of this sleepiness, the sleep momentum, sleep inertia, there's all these terms for it, but we're not now waking our brain up to calculate and do math. That's
Mm-hmm.
why there are actually alarms on our phones that people will have to do a complicated math problem to turn it off to wake the brain up to get them up in the morning. But there is that whole process. So that's why I tell people, don't check the clocks, don't do that. But I will tell you, if you find that you are laying in bed and it has, there are times when you're there and you're not going to fall back to sleep,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
actually better to get out of bed. Do something boring, fold the laundry, empty the dishwasher. Because when we're just laying there in bed trying to will ourselves to sleep, we start to connect the bed with that frustration. And our
Hmm.
brain starts processing and it's learning. So, again, there's so many of these tweaks, but you've hit a really good point with the scheduling. Is that what most people don't realize is when we sleep, we go through this process. And it's stages of sleep and cycles of sleep, and different important things happen at different times. Well, at the beginning of the night, we're spending more time with our physical body healing itself. It's
Mm-hmm.
survival. If I'm hiking through the woods and I hear rustling in the trees, my legs need to work to run away.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not until the early morning hours that our brain is getting a higher percentage of time spent with that mind repair and memory, focus, all of these things that are related. That's when our brain takes out the trash. The 3 pound brain produces over
Mm-hmm.
5 pounds of toxins a year that
Oh
we need to
wow.
flush out. So
Mm-hmm.
we're not contributing to things like Alzheimer's and such. And so there's different amounts of sleepiness that happen. So the last thing to your point, and then I know we want to go a couple other directions, is that think about when you first eat your meal and you're hungry and you can't wait to sit down and have dinner. The first few bites, you're ravenous.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to the end, you're hungry and you're going to finish it, but you don't have that hunger as much because you're closer to satiation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sleep's the same way. So when we wake up in the first few hours of night, it's easier to fall back to sleep because what's happening, we have more of that sleepiness built up. But when we wake up in the early morning hours, it is going to take a little bit more of that effort or energy for our bodies to fully go back to sleep. We still need our sleep, we need our brain repair and such, but we're not going to feel that same heavy sleepiness that we did at the beginning of the night. But when we understand it, it takes the stress and pressure off of it. We're no longer trying to force ourselves to sleep. We're no longer anxious about, am I going to fall back to sleep?
Mm-hmm.
And it actually helps our entire body just to be able to relax and go back to bed and have better quality sleep for those last remaining hours.
See, the problem I wonder is because I want to get 8 hours of sleep, but I'm only getting 5 hours of sleep. Like if I go to bed at 10 o'clock, I'm waking up at 3 o'clock. I've got 5 hours of sleep, and I'm like, this is not good for me. I'm going to end up getting Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease because I'm not getting the adequate sleep requirement. And
Uh-huh.
that is like literally why I'm like, no, 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 you need to sleep. You need to sleep. So, what is the optimal amount of sleep?
I love this question. So, what's interesting is society tells us 8 hours, right? Well, those 8 hours, that's an average. It's just like shoe size. So, for instance, in the United States right now, the average US woman's shoe size is a size 8.5 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
But if we ask people, there's some with a larger or smaller. Well, those eight
Mm-hmm.
hours are just that. There are some people that need more than 8 hours. They barely afford themselves the 8 hour window. They wake up, they feel tired, friends tell them they're lazy. Then there's the other side where the people that only need 6 or 7. They're short sleepers, but they wake up and they feel great. Then they look at the clock and they immediately feel tired. Part of that is that cycling process that I was just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So an average cycle of sleep lasts from about an hour and a half to almost 2 hours. Well, and the typical sleeper gets about 4 to 5 at night. So if I cycle through at an hour and a half at a time, 1 hour and a half to 3 hours to 4.5 to 6 to get 4 cycles. If I'm a 2 hour cycler, 2, 4, 6, 8 to get the same. So just like metabolism, right? Where one person needs 1,800 calories and one person needs 25, and it depends on their activity and how their body processes food. So the kind of the thing that we'll say with the amount of sleep, and if you want, I can walk you through how you figure out exactly what your number is. But what we'll say is this: for the typical adult, we never want to get less than 5 hours.
Okay.
5 hours.
5 hours is the minimum.
Bare minimum. Doesn't mean that that's enough, but 5 hours, that's really kind of the threshold for the typical sleeper, where whenever we're doing adjustments with sleep, sometimes we have to reduce the amount and then build back onto it, just like people do a diet detox. So we never want to get less than 5, and we want to be paying attention to how we're feeling. The ideal night of sleep is going to be that you're falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes. You're sleeping straight through the night, minus that bladder break, and you're waking up and feeling rested and not needing the nap. If that is you, you've hit your sleep sweet spot. For everyone else, it's all the awakenings and the in bed for 2 hours and all these other pieces. That's when we want to start making the modifications and the changes.
So how would you modify it? I just told you my time. So 10 to 3 is my ideal time, maybe, or 10 to 4, which is even more annoying. But at least at 3, I feel like I can catch up. At 4, I'm literally neither here or not there, and I'm stuck in the middle. And I think I also get angry at myself for not being able to sleep. So how would I reset my clock?
So some of the first parts are that we want to make sure that we have a consistent bedtime and wake time across our 7 days, ideally. Now, it may not always be perfect, but when we're going to bed at the same time every night, we're going to feel tired at the correct time. When you eat dinner at 6 every night, you get hungry around 5:30. Yeah. When you wake up at the same time every day, then your body knows exactly how much sleep it has to work with, so it knows when to start that wake up process. Okay. So the first bit is we want to figure out our bed and wake time, and that's our sleep window. This is actually what my TEDx talk was about. Yes. So how you do this is we first take across your 7 days. We're going to say, what is the average amount of sleep that you are getting across your 7 days? So if you're telling me right now, on average, you're getting about 5 hours a night. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, and I always tell people, you need to be honest. Time in bed is not time asleep. So the time reading and watching TV, we're not counting that. So if it's less than 5, we'd start with 5. Yours is 5, so that's great. So we'd take the 5 a.m. and then what we would usually do is work backwards for what is the earliest that you have to wake up or the earliest that you want to wake up. So if you told me that it was 4 a.m. or 5 a.m., so if is yours 4 a.m. right now, is that the ideal?
I would like to wake up at 5:30 a.m.
Okay. So what we would do is we would take 5:30 a.m., we would take your 5 hours of sleep, and we would work backwards and say, okay, your new sleep window for the next 7 days is 12:30 to 5:30. Okay. And the reason that we're doing that, so there's a few things. So I'm not depriving people of sleep. I'm squeezing out any awakenings. But what's good with that is that now, because you're used to going to bed around 10, if you're going to go to bed later, you're going to be so sleepy that by the time it's 12:30 and time to fall asleep, you're going to fall asleep right away. And we set the alarm for 5:30. And even if you didn't sleep that night, you still get out of bed at 5:30 and you feel sleepy the next day. 1 day of sleepiness is okay. We've all experienced it, but that it's an important, so part of it is we're retraining our body when to do that. Now, if 12:30 to 5:30 feels too late, we could make it 11:30 to 4:30. Or we could make it 10:30 to 3:30, but we don't want to stretch the window and spend more time in bed, because what happens is then we haven't built up enough sleepiness to fill the space, and that's why we're waking up so much. So we do that for a week, for 7 days, and then we adjust. If we're falling asleep, we're sleeping through the night, we're waking up and we still feel tired, now we start to build that window out. So if you're doing 12:30 to 5:30, now for the second week, I'm going to add 15 minutes to the bedtime.
Mm.
So now it's going to be 12:15 to 5:30, and we do that for 7 days. And then 12 to 5:30. And so what it does is it's slowly expanding to get you to that sweet spot that 90 to 95% of the time that you're in bed, you're asleep
Sleep.
and you're not waking up as much. Now, one caveat,
Interesting.
if I have anybody listening that has untreated sleep apnea, we would not want to do this because disorders that we see with our sleep, like untreated sleep apnea, people are waking up for their body to start breathing again. I want them
Yes.
to wake up. Or
Yes.
people with seizure disorders and certain things like that, and bipolar, where there's a reason that we can't shrink the window to get
Hmm.
them reset. But for the typical sleeper, that's the best way. There's 70 to 80 years of research supporting those strategies.
Fantastic. I mean, what do you think about napping? I mean, like, the Europeans siesta, afternoon siesta is like a beautiful thing. And for me, I just have to nap one day, and or even if I nap for like 30 minutes in the afternoon, I
Mhm.
cannot sleep. It somehow, the napping just disrupts my day. And I'm normally, if I go to bed at 10 o'clock, at 2 o'clock I'm wide awake because of the 30-minute nap. It just messes me up so badly.
You just said it all for me. This is exactly the point. So if your mother ever said to you, "Don't eat a snack, you'll ruin your dinner,"
Uh-huh. Yeah,
what
of
happens? Because we
course.
need to build up enough hunger, right? So what happens is typically when we're taking those naps during the day, we're depleting our sleepiness. We need to build up that sleep debt so that we have enough sleepiness to sleep all the way through the night. So here's the thing with naps. I'm not saying that people will never take them again, but
Hmm.
when you're taking them every single day, your body learns to expect them. And so what ends up happening is that's why you're feeling tired at 2 o'clock every afternoon, because your body has learned that that's when it gets sleep. So we want to mix it up. We don't want to take a nap every single day. We want it to be exception versus rule. Use
Hmm.
it for jet lag, for
Yeah.
travel, for those things. And if you're going to take a nap, we actually want it to be a power nap, 20 to 30 minutes max. Anything
Okay.
more than that ends up cutting more into your sleep at night. But that quick 20, 30-minute power nap, it's like in the middle of the afternoon where you have a scoop of peanut butter or an apple instead of the bag of chips. It's a little healthy snack to get you over to dinner, but you're not reducing your hunger and you can eat dinner. So we need to be careful with that. And I have some people that will use the naps for that quick boost of energy or creativity. I mean, Thomas Edison literally would put two ball bearings in his hand, have a metal plate under his hand, start to take a nap, and as soon as he would fall asleep and they would drop, it would wake him up, and
Huh.
then he would journal everything.
That's
So
interesting.
there are
Mm.
some people that need that little boost from time to time, but the key is we don't want it to become the specific part of our every single day schedule, because then it depletes our sleep at night and our body learns to expect it.
Another thing which, I've talked about, I learned in medical school and everything, is that your sleep need kind of decreases as you grow older, but the
Mhm.
older you grow, the more sleep you want. Like, how do we navigate that?
That's a really great point. It's funny. I tell people it's the terrible joke that the universe plays on us because
Yes.
we're young and we seem to want sleep, but we don't have the time for it. And then we've hit retirement and we're up at 3.
Yes.
But part of how this works is if we think about what sleep is for. So sleep is for that cell growth, that regeneration. And so think about how much sleep a newborn gets versus
Hmm.
a 6 month old, a 2 year old, a 10-year old. I always joke, I say, by hit a certain age of our lives, and we're not having the growth spurts other than our waistlines, and those are trying to stop. But if we think about how much our body needs and how active we are, again, I know I keep comparing it to food, but think about for our senior specials and our portion sizes. We're
Yes.
not going to need as many calories because we don't have as much we have to fuel. And so
Yes.
that's part of it. For a lot of people, they may have always gone to bed at the same time and now they're waking up earlier and they think something's wrong. It's just if we're not as physically active, if our body isn't needing to be healed as much, if we're not using our brains as much, we don't need as much sleep to repair because we don't have as much that needs to repair.
Oh,
And so it's
absolutely.
does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
And even the
Now,
when we feel tired changes over time.
absolutely. I think this episode will be incomplete if we do not talk about sleep supplements. Do you recommend them? Are they useful? Is melatonin good for you? There are so many sleep supplements. The industry is crowded.
I know. So here's what I will say, and I
You
always
feel
have to give the
exhausted.
caveat. Oh, I know. But I always have to put the caveat that I'm not a prescribing provider. I have
Yeah.
to be cautious that I have to talk about from the high level of what we know because of the people that are listening. We don't know their specific medical history. And if their doctors are telling them to do something, You got to trust their doctors.
Yes.
But what we know from the behavioral sleep medicine world, in general, we would typically like to see people using naturally occurring supplements when they can, things like the melatonins and the magnesiums over Z-Quils and Unisoms and those types of
Yes.
things. And ideally, we want to be using a lot of these behavioral strategies to teach our bodies how to sleep again instead of having to be on a prescription every single night for the rest of their lives. I'm not knocking Ambience and such because there are some people that truly need that and the trazodones and such, but I will tell you the majority of people that I see coming into my clinic, many times there are other adjustments we can use so they don't have to rely on it. With that being said, when we get into the naturally occurring supplements, there are a few key things to pay attention to. Melatonin obviously is an important one that a lot of people use, and it can work well. But it's important to note that melatonin is not a sedative or a hypnotic. So what that means is it's not designed to knock you out and put you to sleep. It's a phase shifter to adjust your circadian rhythm. That's why naturally we see a spike of it in the body about 4 to 6 hours before bed. So typically, providers that are familiar with sleep medicine will say, take your melatonin 2 to 4 hours before bed, or at least 1 to 2 hours before bed instead of right before, because we want that natural spike. That's why it doesn't work well. If you take it at 3 a.m. when you wake up and now you're trying to force yourself back to sleep, you're going to wake up and feel tired and groggy and have the headache. Yeah. The other things to note are how much. A lot of people take larger and larger doses because they're trying to make it work. But we want to be cautious about the dosage amount. Again, the research looks about, a few milligrams, 0.5 to 3, 5 max, not taking large amounts. But the keys are to make sure that because these supplements are not FDA regulated, you want to make sure that you're purchasing a brand that does third-party testing. Because recent research, the Clinical Journal of Sleep Medicine, they looked at the top 31 brands across the country. It ranged from minus 83% of the active ingredient to positive 453%. And a third were laced with serotonin. So melatonin's a great thing, not saying not to use it, but we want to use it at the right time, the right dosages, and make sure that it's truly what we're getting. I'm also hearing a lot of individuals are recommending taking the supplements separately. So what I mean by that, like magnesium, for instance, a great one that we see, especially a lot of women that are going through perimenopause and such, and they're starting to lose the estrogen and progesterone. We're seeing that magnesium can help the body to have some of those natural relaxing components that they were losing with the hormones. But there are 6 different types of magnesium. The magnesium citrate, that's a stool softener. Don't take that, runny tummy. You want the glycinate, go to sleep glycinate, and that one you would take about 20 to 30 minutes before bedtime. So if you're taking a compound thing that has melatonin and magnesium, you're not taking them both at the correct time for them to have their best use. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Dr. Milanak, thank you so much. I mean, I have learned so much. I love the 3-2-1 method. I love the brain dump before going to bed.
Yeah.
I think that's a very valuable tool. The use of melatonin and the using the bed just for sleep and for romantic activities, and end of story. I love it. Thank you so much. I truly appreciate your time and you coming on to my show.
Thank you, and sweet dreams.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for listening. If you found us valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast app. And also, please consider leaving us a rating or a review, as that helps others find the podcast too. I hope you have a great week ahead.